I'm going to share some more tips from Sound and Sense for how to get the most out of a poem. The advice today concerns how to read it. The first thing they say is to read so as to hear the sounds of the words in your mind. The best way to do this, of course, is to read the poem out loud and slowly. This will help you both to decipher the poem's essential meaning and to discover the nuances of meaning that are conveyed by the sounds of the words. One thing you're going to hear me mention more than once in this series is that poetry draws on all the resources of language, so even the sounds of words are important. When you engage in a casual conversation, you're not usually conscious when choosing your words of the sounds they make. But a great poet, in trying to create for you a distilled and powerful experience through the use of language, chooses his words not just for their meanings, but for their music. The authors then make recommendations about how to read the poem aloud. First, and I love this formulation, they say, read the poem affectionately, but not affectedly. Now, this too has to be a layered, multi-step process because the first time you read it, you might not grasp it at all. So to read it with affection would be premature. But once you do begin to get a sense of the meaning, you want your understanding of its purpose to emerge in the tone of your voice. If you heard my reading of Rizpah in the introductory video to this series, you might have noticed the strong emotion in my voice. When I read that poem, I'm not conscious of putting on any performance. It just moves me so much. There was a long pause in my reading because I was choked with emotion, and my voice was strained because I was shedding real tears. Now, not all poems are so heart-wrenching that they draw on that kind of depth of emotion, but the idea for any poem is the same, for the meaning of the poem to be mirrored in your expression. As the authors say in Sound and Sense, this does not require artificial flourishes and vocal histrionics. Rather, they say, the emotion is already there. It wants only a fair chance to get out. It will express itself if the poem is read naturally and sensitively. They also caution against two rookie poetry reading mistakes. The first, giving too much emphasis to the metrical pattern and failing to give grammatical pauses their full due. Take, for example, a line from John Donne's Break of Day, which I covered in part 4. If we read the line like this, the poor, the foul, the false love can admit but not the busied man, we would be totally stymied in our effort to decipher the poem's meaning. There's no punctuation after can. Though the metrical pattern requires a shift to a new line, the meaning of the lines requires that we see a grammatical continuation. So it should instead be read, the poor, the foul, the false love can admit, but not the busied man. The ultimate goal is to give enough emphasis that you retain the music in the meter, but not so much that you lose the meaning. Another rookie mistake is to distort the pronunciation of words in the poem because you are too focused on its overall rhythm. So, for example, the rookie might read Tennyson's line from The Eagle, which I covered in part 1, like this. The wrinkled sea beneath him crawls, he watches from his mountain walls, and like a thunderbolt he falls. That's awful, I know. My students always do that at first. I encourage them just to say the individual words as they would say them in conversation. They wouldn't say, "Did you hear that? I think it was a thunderbolt." So they shouldn't do it in a poem either. Those were some rapid-fire reading tips. So to summarize, first, read the poem out loud to help you decipher its essential meaning and to help you hear the nuances conveyed in the sounds. When you read out loud, don't overemphasize the metrical pattern. Give the grammar its due and don't distort the pronunciation of words. Let me give a quick illustration of how these tips will serve you, using my personal favorite poem for making this point. It's an excerpt from another poem by Tennyson called The Lady of Shalott. The poem begins with a lonely lady trapped in a tower, living a dreamlike existence detached from the world around her, weaving the scenes she sees from afar on her loom. Later in the poem, she is shocked into greater awareness by the appearance of Lancelot, with whom she falls in love. This change from dream world to abrupt awakening is captured in the story of the poem and in its sounds. And you might only notice the latter if you read it aloud and let your lips form the words. It begins, "On either side the river lie long fields of barley and of rye that clothe the wold and meet the sky." I feel like you can hear this dreamy swaying of the barley in the flow and the sound of the words. Then, when Lancelot appears, a bowshot from her bower eaves, he rode between the barley sheaves. The sun came dazzling through the leaves and flamed upon the brazen greaves of bold Sir Lancelot. Everything about those words is bold and abrupt and strong, with hard sounds and a masculine quality, and it's a complete change from that dreamy-like sequence that came before. That's something that you would only notice if you're pronouncing the words out loud and hearing and feeling their sounds. That's a really essential part of deciphering the meaning and understanding the nuances of a poem. If you haven't already, I definitely recommend that you read The Lady of Shalott in its entirety. It's a beautiful poem, well worth your while. I'll be back with more tips and poems worth your while soon.